Tensions escalate between Boris Johnson and King Charles as new revelations confirm that last year, in the middle of Rwanda, the pair had a massive row over border control. Okay, so GETTR, who was a good friend and former advisor to Boris Johnson, has been revealing more insider information about what's been going on with Boris as former Prime Minister. And we now know about that argument that happened last year during one of the Commonwealth summits and meetings in Rwanda. King Charles, who was Prince Charles at the time, had made some comments, apparently, some remarks at the time. They said, well, he's not too happy about the UK government's immigration policy and sending migrants to Rwanda, for example. And that summit happened, and Boris Johnson and Downing Street at the time basically played it down. They said, yeah, no, it's just the two leaders had some conversations about this, and he was a prince and I'm prime minister, everything's fine, look, we're so happy together. We now know that that argument actually quite escalated badly, and the two had a massive row. Firstly, Boris Johnson was saying, well, why is a prince they're telling an elected MP, an elected government what to do? It's not really his job, and what is wrong with protecting our borders? So that happened. And the issue with this is that, of course, all these words are coming out now, and clearly, GETTR, who's starting his new project, he's doing his media rounds, and he's been, he's briefed Boris Johnson essentially saying, "I'm going to say these things." This is just raising the tensions between the palace and the political system. So he said Boris briefed that the two had a good old chinwag. It was just chit-chat and banter and arguments, like in the civilized. And they covered a lot of ground. This is according to Boris at the time. GETTR said that now that what actually happened was less amicable. I went in quite hard, Boris Johnson said, essentially squaring up to the prince and confronting him about what he, as unelected royalty, had said about the actions of a democratically elected government. Prince Charles was busted. He had obviously expressed some criticism, and though he tried to play it down, Boris pointed out the obvious, saying, if you didn't say it, we both know your people could ring the newspapers and kill the story. The fact that they haven't done that says it all. And that is a good point. The palace always brief the papers anyway, and they always try to control their own narrative. And this becomes a problem when you have a prince who's basically a political activist at the time. And that's what so many people are worried about now. So many people are still skeptical, saying, well, it's early days, but King Charles might say the wrong thing at some point. He did promise, obviously, the moment he becomes king, he's going to stop doing that. But, well, I don't really mind. People individually have their own views and their own opinions in their heads, but just keep it to yourself. You're not an elected official. You cannot really go out there and criticize actually what Boris used to claim, the people's government. Now, the people's government of Boris Johnson also massively failed and disappointed everybody who voted for them, but that's not really the point here. The point here is about the relationship between an unelected royal family and the elected executive branch of our country. So that whole thing continued, obviously, and he says that the bust-up in Rwanda, and the irony was that this argument was actually happening in Rwanda, was the final straw, adding, the relations never fully recovered, and Charles will be relieved that Boris had left number 10 before he ascended to the throne. So it's a little bit awkward, and now that this story is out, it's just going to raise more tensions, and it's not really healthy for our democracy. But maybe this could actually open up some new conversations about the system, but we'll see what's going to happen. They also had a massive argument on slavery. I mean, for the love of... okay, so they say that Charles was planning a speech on slavery. Boris squared up, confronted him, and warned him, I would be careful, he said, or you'll end up having to sell the Duchy of Cornwall to pay reparations for those who built it. Relations never fully recovered. Why was he going out there doing all these things? You're going to the Commonwealth Summit. You're there to, obviously, as Prince of Wales at the time, to meet all the leaders of Commonwealth nations, not just make it about one particular country and one issue. It wasn't really about that. It wasn't really the job of Prince Charles to do all this. Not necessarily just to make a speech on slavery. How many times are you going to do that? But secondly, do the whole nonsense about the Rwanda plan and protecting our borders and illegal migration. I think the palace need to have a look at the mood of the country right now and see how the majority want to protect their borders. The majority, regardless of which party they vote for, actually want to sort out the illegal migration crisis. And a big chunk of society also want to sort out mass migration, legal and illegal. Because that's the other point that we don't really hear much in the mainstream media. Mass legal migration is also a huge problem. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'm Mahyar Tousi, and we are the media.